I would introduce further taxation on the very highest incomes. And I would do it not only to generate the resources, which are vital, but also to demonstrate equity in our society. Because in amongst those feelings that I described earlier, about being abandoned, left behind, done down, is a view that no matter what happens in the world, the same interests always win, and everybody else gets gutted public services. I'm the last bloke in the world to make an appeal to Tories. But I would say that so much of our system and the integrity of our democracy depends upon there being a rational, forward-looking, right-of-centre party to contest the ideas of democratic socialist Labour. We'd all be losers if that option disappeared.
Lord Kinnock, it's 40 years actually since your one of your most infamous speeches. It changed the trajectory. One of your most famous speeches. It changed the trajectory of the Labour Party. I wonder, this is a rather broad stroke question, but I wonder if you're looking at the political climate right now, obviously we've just been talking off camera here about reform, what would you put in that speech that would be different? Would you be talking about tackling the rise of the Reform Party?
I think I'd have no alternative but to do that, but I would have been doing it in a different way for rather longer than is currently the case. I mean, it was essential for Keir to give attention to reform in his speech last week. But in some ways, that need arises from the delay in getting hold of what reform is, not just who they are, but what they actually are. And the virtual absence of effective political interviewing by mainstream media means that reform has been getting away for a long time now with half-digested facts, counterfeit statements, inconsistencies, and also managing to do without any thorough examination of its associations and the various activities and statements that typify the leading members of reform. So they've had a bit of a media holiday with one or two pretty great exceptions. And it means that the other parties, particularly Labour, have got to turn their fire onto reform. The reality is, of course, that the only thing that's going to depress support for them and defeat them is accomplishment, achievement in areas of policy and action that have practical advantage for the population in general. And in addition to that, I think that with a degree of wit and analysis, the Labour Party could and should be focusing attention on political attacks, on reform. Now, whether that's best done by the leader of the party or by others, I have no doubt that it's better, if it's avoidable, for the leader not to punch down at a party with 5 members of parliament and a quite broad but extremely flimsy electoral support base. It'd be much better if they were the subject of more acerbic approaches by other members of the party, particularly the backbenchers. If I was a youngster now in Parliament, I would delight in taking them on.
What would you go for? Because sort of the prevailing...
Yes.
The prevailing line from the Labour Party is they sort of go after the NHS and they say that Nigel Farage would like to privatise the NHS.
Which is true.
Is that what you would go for?
Well, that's one of the things. But I'll give you a precise instance. Back in July, Farage went down to South Wales and he went to Port Talbot and he made a speech in which he advocated the quote, reindustrialisation of South Wales, specifying his desire to reopen collieries and to restart the blast furnaces in the Port Talbot Steelworks. Now, anybody who knows anything about coal mining or steel making or just lives in those areas knows that you can sink a new pit, but you can't reopen one. And you can build a new blast furnace, though I don't think anybody in the world ever would, but you can't restart one. So without any reservation, he was insulting the intelligence and knowledge of the people that he was addressing. When he was asked by a young woman journalist whether these things were possible, he switched to saying they were aspirations and that anything was possible with a change of mindset. I'm quoting him exactly. Now, when you've got someone like that to go against, then, the contest isn't easy, but it does mean that you can approach such lack of substance and figment of imagination and delusion with fact, with reality, with the truth. And that's what should be done.
But you say it's insulting, and you say that the people locally would have seen the flaws in you can't reopen a pit, you can't fire up a blast furnace, but yet Reform are polling very well in Wales. Yes. So why is that?
Because we have a population, not just in South Wales or Wales generally, but in various places in the country, in areas that were devastated by the pace and nature of massive industrial change since the 1970s, but particularly through the 1980s. And people in those areas, with justification, feel that they've been neglected. The phrase used is left behind, disadvantaged, because unlike some other countries, the Nordic countries, for instance, parts of Germany, for instance, parts of France, for instance, that change came with great rapidity, without preparation, and certainly without compensation, without incentives to bring in new investment or undertake new effective training and education of people so that they could adapt to new challenges and new opportunities. And it does mean, you're familiar with South Wales yourself, that the rundown has been undertaken in a little bit more than a generation. But the suddenness of the change, without any real substantial assistance, despite the best efforts of some local representatives, has been traumatic. And people are reacting to that. So when somebody comes along and offers them the snake oil of simplistic answers to very complex problems, they say, yeah, we'll give that a try. And it's also a way of poking the establishment in the eye with a sharp stick. I mean, a great deal of the motivation behind the Brexit vote was that. Not because people were stupid or racist, but because the establishment presented them with a yes-no argument, and they said no, as a way of inflicting their view on people that they held, and institutions that they held to be responsible for their woes. Now, in the process, they did themselves a great deal of harm, real, serious, lasting harm for themselves and for the younger generations. But I understand why they lashed out. And as I said, it wasn't in stupidity, ignorance, racism. It was in order to inflict punishment for deeply felt grievance. And of course, grievance is what parties like Reform plant and harvest. They live off grievance and the resentment and alienation that goes with it.
I mean, so what on earth does Keir Starmer do then in this situation? Because if you look at everything that you've just described as symptomatic of what we saw at the last election, the constituencies where Reform came second, they were constituencies that have been, quote unquote, left behind. Yes. They are seaside towns that have been neglected for decades, if not longer. What does Keir Starmer do? Can he spend his way out of grievance?
Well, it isn't a question of hosing down the economy with money. It is a question of increasing public investment in order deliberately to magnetize private investment, and also, of course, to rebuild institutions and services. Now, that is underway, but by definition, it's not rapid. By definition, it will take many months, years, to fructify, to give evidence of change. You will see it in the improvements in the health service. You will see it as the houses are built. You will see it in changed approaches to further education. And people will substantially benefit from it because the money is going to be spent at record levels, 140 billion specified for public investment, which is absolutely essential after over a decade of very, very severe, ruinous rundown in public services and public infrastructure and community resources. All that's been happening, and rebuilding always takes a lot longer than destruction. So consequently, that's where we are now. No, what Keir's got to do is to continue along the path that's been undertaken. I would add a further ingredient. I don't know whether Rachel Reeves, who's a very smart lady, is going to add this ingredient. I would introduce further taxation on the very highest incomes in particular forms. And I would do it not only to generate the resources, which are vital, but also to demonstrate equity in our society, because in amongst those feelings that I described earlier about being abandoned, left behind, done down, let down, is the view that no matter what happens in the world or in our country, the same interests always win, and everybody else gets gutted public services. So it's necessary not only to raise revenues by extending taxation, for instance, equalizing capital gains tax and income tax rates, which would bring in about 12, 14 billion, and not inflict burdens on what are now called working people, what you and I might call the working class. But those resources would be available. But almost as important is the demonstration of the fact that the government is aware of the sense of grievance that people have got and is responding to it by realistic and real changes in the distribution of income and wealth. And I think that signal is very necessary in a very, very brassed-off country.
I think so. Rachel Reeves would argue that she did raise capital gains tax at the last autumn budget, but it was incremental. And actually, the raise there was so much lead-up time that essentially many people were able to squirrel away money that meant it was no longer eligible for the capital gains tax. Do you think that she was too shy, perhaps, at the time? Do you think she should have gone right up to income tax rather than just sort of incremental couple of percent?
Well, there's always a danger that Labour chancellors entering His Majesty's Treasury contract shyness. I mean, we've had two chancellors that have been in control of the Treasury. Roy Jenkins for a couple of years, not a natural political ally of mine or me of him, but very good at that job. And, of course, Gordon Brown, followed by Alistair Darling. And between the two of them, they literally saved the economy and helped to enable the world to resist the effects of the biggest financial crash in all of history. But other than that, even very capable people who I greatly respect, like Dennis Healey, didn't get hold of the Treasury by the scruff of the neck and act according to their own basic intelligence and commitment. And Rachel is immensely responsible, which is highly commendable. But I think that it would be a good thing if she was to demonstrate a little more audacity. You'll be familiar with the works of John Maynard Keynes and the view that he expressed with great effectiveness and great benefit to the world that governments are there to use their power to enable continual economic growth and stability in the economy. And for 30 years, by the application of his approach to economics, the world did prosper the 30 years following the war. It was only when a different scheme, philosophy, theory of economics from a man called Milton Friedman, called monetarism, was imposed on large parts of the world that things started really to come apart. I would like, and I'm not theorizing now, the restoration of common sense Keynesianism. Rachel understands that. She made the Mays lecture a year last February, utterly brilliant and absolutely to the point, with a very heavy focus on the value of public investment, which she's undertaking. But it takes so long to manifest positive results. It'll come, but I wish she could add to it with a little, as I say, audacity.
In the interim period, you've got, you there saying that you would want to see a wealth tax. Keir Starmer, during his speech,
well,
his
I'd go for
conference
asset taxes, actually.
See, that's what I always interpreted it to mean. I always assumed that a wealth tax meant asset tax, but I think it has been rather confused.
Yeah, it's the reason that I distinguish, and this is just me really, I don't have any great pretensions for distinguishing between wealth and assets, because, of course, assets are wealth, and lots of wealth are assets. But I make the point simply because so much wealth is mobile and can be moved in order to avoid, not evade, to avoid the obligations of taxation. Assets, especially physical assets, are, of course, more difficult to move. So when we're talking in this area, my preferred focus is on assets. But, of course, in addition to that, what I'd be looking for is the more immediately feasible results of changes in taxation on highest incomes, unearned incomes, like those derived from profit and dividend. I wish we could restore in the categorizations what used to be called earned and unearned incomes, not least because in this century, earned incomes, even quite high incomes, but earned incomes, wages, salaries, have been more or less flatlining, certainly since about 2008, because of various economic circumstances in real terms, whereas assets in the same period have been zooming. And I think equity requires, I think efficiency requires that attention is given to the immense advance in the value of assets, certainly by comparison with the stagnation of real wages.
According to Keir Starmer and his speech, anyone offering a wealth tax is a snake oil salesman. Is that what you consider yourself? Are you a snake oil salesman?
Boy, I don't know if he said that. I listened to it closely, and I didn't feel the back of my hair rising. Mind, there's not a hell of a lot of hair there. So.
I don't think you were called out by name. There was a comparison between the assumed subjects of this were Nigel Farage and Andy Burnham. Andy Burnham, of course, had given this huge interview in which he apparently had frightened the bond markets.
Yes, one sentence in what must have been a 5,000-word interview, which I read. And I knew exactly what Andy was getting at. Given the chance, he might rephrase it, not to inflict trust mania on the bond markets, the very sensitive bond markets. And I mean, we're dealing with the most nervous generation of capitalists in the history of the world. If the Victorians had responded to challenges in the same way that that the private equity managers do now, we'd still be riding around on horses. Or at least they would be. You and I would be walking.
Thank you. What do you think about Andy Burnham? What do you make of him as a... Let's take the sort of the technicalities of him becoming leader out of this.
That erases it.
So without the technicalities, do you think he would be the man for the job?
Well, I supported him when he ran once for the leadership. And he performed is the wrong word, his approach to articulating ideas and organizing support was less convincing than I expected it to be. Now, that was quite a long time ago. He's since then been the mayor of Manchester, and he's manifested very considerable talent. So I think the Andy of today is much better at the quality of leadership, small l, than he was when he ran for the leadership of the Labour Party. I don't think that in the foreseeable future, Andy really considers himself to be a candidate for the leadership. There are people around who are maneuvering on his behalf, I think, generally speaking, without his knowledge or participation. But the problem is, in politics, you will get little tribes forming who are more Christian than Jesus, if you know what I mean. They're more communist than Marx. And they become zealots. And they want to uphold the interests of their favored candidate, with or without the inclination or knowledge of the candidate. And I think that to some extent, Andy may be a victim of some of that over-enthusiasm amongst the grouping of people, I don't know how big or small it is, that might want to support him. I just cut a long story short and say he's not a candidate, and as long as he's made a mayor of Manchester, he's not going to be a candidate. And I don't think anybody should waste time and energy on thinking about it.
But you could, I suppose, support a Burnham de facto candidate like Lucy Powell?
Good God, no. I mean, I'm supporting Lucy for the deputy leadership. I've known her for over 20 years. She is a friend of the family, and she is quite a great political package. There's no doubt about that. She's a good girl. I mean, I've known her since she was, I suppose, the year after she graduated, something like that. But she is not Andy Burnham's candidate. Lucy is running as Lucy Powell. And the alternative candidate, the education secretary, she's running as herself too. These are not ciphers. These are not other people's candidates. They're two highly intelligent, very effective, and dedicated women. I think if they were blokes, we wouldn't be getting the same kind of crap if they were getting supported by a couple of women.
You've made me out to be a misogynist.
No, not you, love. No, you're raising... I'm sorry, I shouldn't say love.
You can. It's fine.
Wait, okay, that's great. But no, you're raising perfectly fair questions that are current in the so-called mainstream. And like a lot of misdirected rivers, they go off in entirely useless directions.
Thank you.
Not your fault.
No, don't worry. My mother said similar things about me.
Mothers do.
Back to the sort of the holier than thou analogy that you were just giving about Andy Burnham, about possibly some people might throw their weight or their support behind a certain candidate without fully knowing their policy agenda. Would you call that, or would you ascribe that to, say, the Jeremy Corbyn complex?
Oh, God, that's something entirely different. I mean, people support Jeremy Corbyn because he's willing to offer almost instant gratification to radicals. On any test of practicality, he fails, just like he fails every test of earnest hard work. I mean, he's been a member of Parliament for 42 years. And other than the 5 years that he was leader of the Labour Party, his record is completely undistinguished because he never sat on a select committee or a standing committee. There is no Jeremy Corbyn private member's bill. There is no record of a distinguished, memorable speech or question. What Jeremy's done for 42 years, apart from collecting his salary, is to speak to groups of people who already agree with him. I don't think it's a qualification to be an inspirational political leader, but I do know why he had real appeal. There's no doubt at all about that. It's because a whole swathe of people, mainly younger people, totally understandably, were absolutely fed up with the paralysis and stagnation of politics. And along comes Jeremy with the bare minimum of nominations to run for the leadership. And they said, yes, this guy is saying he wants to do what I would like politics to do. Now, I mean, I could tick several of those boxes. Ideally, if we had sunshine on demand and there was no want in the world and people had given up war. There's so much that Jeremy says that I could entirely approve of and indeed enthusiastically support. It's not going to happen. And the reason why I really do criticize him is he offers illusions, which is why people become disillusioned. The way to avoid disillusionment is not to start with illusions. And that doesn't mean you've got to be sour or stale, or lack imagination or aspiration for real change in our world and in our country, in our time. But it does mean that you've got to be rational. It does mean you've got to measure what you can do. It does mean that you must be dedicated to securing the greatest possible breadth of support. And if you turn inward and value power in the Labour Party more than power for the Labour Party, you're not doing your duty and you're not being rational and realistic.
Do you think the phenomena around him is similar to that of Nigel Farage?
In the sense that it offers relatively simplistic answers to very complex problems, yes, but that's the definition of populism. I am your leader, what you want me to say. I mean, you can't bring up kids on that. You can't learn to drive on that basis. You've got to take into account an endless variety of complexities and not be tied down by them, hidebound, or suppressed by them, but find practical ways to deal with them. And generally speaking, slogans don't do it. If you can print the whole of your philosophy on the front of a T-shirt, you're not going to get much progress for the human race.
Well, I'll tell you what you can't print on a T-shirt anymore is any support for the now proscribed terrorist organisation Palestine Action. I wonder, there were 400, nearly 500 arrests yesterday on on Saturday on Parliament Square. What do you think about those arrests? Do you think that the Home Secretary has got control of the narrative around these protests?
Well, when people turn up, respectable, all right, I'll say it, elderly people turn up specifically to be arrested, you're not winning the argument. I mean, the suffragettes turned up to be arrested. They chained themselves to railings to be arrested. They smashed windows to be arrested. And eventually, rightly, women over 21 got the vote. And I mean, I didn't vote for the categorization of Palestine Action as a terrorist organization because I'd be prepared, if I was sitting behind the magistrate's bench, to sentence them for criminal acts that inflicted damage or massive inconvenience on their fellow citizens. But that would be because they committed defined crimes, not because they were terrorists. And I actually think if there is a war on terror, and indeed it should be, that war is not, that commitment to defeating terrorism is not strengthened by picking up people in Trafalgar Square who are there to be arrested as a way of protesting against what they see to be unjust laws. So it's not a government policy that I could positively support.
What do you think about giving greater powers to the police to make arrests? So if you are a routine protester, I mean, that's yet to be defined in law what a routine protester is. But if you will be more, the police can use, more powers on you. Do you think that's right?
Well, the thing is, under the criminal law, if you repeatedly commit the same offense, then it stacks up against you. Hell, that's why I got points for breaking the speed limit and was banned for 6 months. I'll tell you a funny thing. Well, isn't the funny thing really? It drove me nuts. The highest speed that I was caught doing in a 50-mile-an-hour zone was 56 miles an hour.
Really?
On the motorway, when they kept on changing the speed limit. Lots of people get caught like that. But, I mean, if you can't pay the fine, don't do the crime. I mean, it's basic.
I've never done the crime personally. I've got a clean record.
Well, mate. I'm very, very glad to know you. It isn't often I come across saints. It's even more rarely these days. Anyway, the thing is, if people repeatedly commit the same offense, and it has been categorized by law as an offense, they can expect additional severity to the action taken against them. I'm not sure that the police are assisted. They'll be the best judge of that because they're the practitioners and they've got independence in their operations, which is right. But I don't think that they're particularly assisted by being given broader powers when what they're actually faced with is repetitive offense.
Well, also by that supposition, then the crime would be protesting in the first instance, right?
Well, the crime would be impeding the highway. I'm not a lawyer, but everybody knows.
Well, I know you're not. You got banned from driving for speeding.
Well, lawyers get that as well, Yes. But it was. You know the catalogue of crimes of impeding, interfering, blocking, all those terms that can hold someone to be acting against the broader interests of their fellow citizens. And there's any number of those crimes. And I think probably there's enough of them to cover the offense of immensely inconvenient protesting, which, for instance, stops you getting your wife to hospital when she's having a baby, or prevents you getting to a job interview, or the other impediments that can enormously inconvenience the general public. Now, I don't think we should ban protesting, I think there is a case for saying when terrible inconvenience and additional expense is inflicted on society, then the law has got a right to apprehend people.
Just finally, I wanted to go on a little tangent just before we finish, but the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, yesterday announced that there would be a list of, if you're watching this, if you're listening and not watching, Lord Kinnock is laughing, she would like members of her shadow cabinet to sign up to promise that they will back leaving the ECHR if they get into government. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't think it's got much to do with Magna Carta, has it? It doesn't got much to do with the conventions of our unwritten constitution. I mean, I don't think you can require people who are members of the party to abide by the party's rules and not to bring the party into disrepute. And even the most small L liberal and tolerant parties, like the Labour Party, have to have rules. I mean, I said once when people used to argue with me about the Labour's a broad church, I used to say, yes, but even the broadest churches have walls, and if they haven't, they end up as ruinous piles surrounded by graveyards. So, rules you've got to have. You've got to have rules to prevent people scoring from offside. I mean, that's basically a requirement of human society. Okay. But the idea that you can require people to sign up a pledge that they will support in advance withdrawal from international law, I think that is ultimately impractical and, in its inspiration, authoritarian. And I don't like that very much.
Do you think it would benefit the ordinary person in Britain if we left the ECHR?
No, the convention is there, as one of its authors, Winston Churchill, tirelessly pointed out, and many, many people have done it since, to safeguard the rights of the citizen, not just internationally in their movement between countries or away from torture and terror, but in the conduct of their lives. That's why it's there. Now, it may be that because of gigantic alterations in people's willingness and ability to move long distances, sometimes for employment, sometimes to seek refuge, then it should be adapted to a different age of travel and technology. There's a case for looking at it in that way. Some of my colleagues have made that case. But the idea of uprooting it and removing principles of commitment in the convention, that is a very, very bad idea. People must never forget that the convention arose out of the greatest horror ever inflicted on mankind. And in the wake of 2 world wars and a devastating economic slump that lasted for the best part of 20 years, in the utter misery of the 1940s and early 1950s. And the convention was a product of minds that met, people on the right, people on the left, people with no politics, people with profound politics. And they hit upon a form of words intended to safeguard people against the repetition of the annihilation of rights. And that's what we've got to keep in mind all the time.
If you were leader of the if you were leader of the opposition and Kemi Badenoch was Prime Minister, would you be worried?
I'm sorry it's not going to arise, I'm saying sorry because I'm being polite. I'm quite happy it's not going to arise. And there are very, very few certainties in life and certainly not in politics. But I would say that was for a variety of reasons, a certainty. That doesn't mean there's not going to be another Conservative Prime Minister, though I think they know, certainly the thinking ones know. Michael Heseltine is in the Tory party conference speaking at a fringe meeting. He knows, and there are other Tories of his general alignment, not people I agree with on much, but sensible people who've been around the block a few times, know that unless they make a radical change and address the realities of today and the challenges of tomorrow, it's going to be a long time before they produce a leader who can become Prime Minister.
On that ominous note, thank you very much for your time.
Do you think it's ominous?
Well, I think if you're a Conservative Party supporter, it might be.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And well, I tell you what, I'm the last bloke in the world to make an appeal to Tories. But I would say that so much of our system and the integrity of our democracy depends upon there being a rational, forward-looking, right-of-centre party to contest the ideas of democratic socialist Labour, that we'd all be losers if that option disappeared and was subsumed into a populist set of simplicities that actually disguise really serious challenges.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.